How's it going, you guys? It's Scott with Everyday Home Repairs, and today I want to walk you through the full installation process on this Delta series. It's an acrylic tub shower surround. Now it is a 3-piece kit, and this is one of the 3 pieces. Now I will caution you, I've had many professionals install this for me in the past, and if they don't do all the steps involved, the end product is loose, it chatters, it creaks, it's not great. So you need to follow all the steps so when you get it finally installed, it's a solid product that's going to stand up for years and years of use. And also, stud spacing in your walls are not going to be ideal. Some of the videos you might see out there are going to have perfectly spaced studs where they made a mock wall and they install it and everything goes great. That's not how it actually works in the real world most of the time. So we'll address a few of those concerns. So first up, let's jump in and talk a little bit more about your stud walls, making sure they're ready for the installation. So we'll start off on the back wall here, and we need to install 2 studs horizontally across the middle cavities of this back wall. The vertical placement in the wall for this first one's going to be 44.5 inches off the floor. The second one's going to be 47.5. So when you're measuring on this back wall, don't forget your tape's probably sitting on the base 2x4. So you need to be at 43. There's that mark. Here's my other mark. And then since we're doing 47.5 on this side, we'll do the same subtraction of the 1.5 inches and we'll just go to 46. So now you have your 2 reference points for the vertical direction. This is also where you'll get your measurement. Assuming you have 16-inch on center spaced studs, or close to that, you should be around 14.5 inches. So my first one's going to be 14 5/8, and my second one is going to be 14 1/4. So now I have both studs cut. I'm going to put them in place and then sink 2 screws on each side to hold them securely. So next up, these panels are held in place with screws going through the flanges on the top and on the sides. So what you want to confirm is you have studs that will give you a solid screwing surface for all those flanges. On the back side, I'm looking good. On my valve side, I'm also looking good. But on this side here, if I take the panel, I just go ahead and dry fit that in place. Now these panels do bump out away from the back panel, so you just put this bump out flush with your tub that's in place. What I can see is my stud is really not giving me much meat to screw into. So what I'm going to do is put 1 additional stud here in the wall, ensuring that I'll be able to securely fasten 5 screws through that. Now you have another chance because we'll go in the dry fit stage where we'll get all the panels in place, doing a final check, starting to drill out our locations that the screws will go through. So that gives you an opportunity to do any modifications to your wall if you need additional support. So before jumping into the dry fit, I do want to call out one step that I'm not going to do, but you might need to do depending on your use case. So for this tub surround, if you look at these panels, they have this large bump out. Now this bump out would be the surface you would attach any like glass shower doors or different shower door systems to. So as it stands right now, this guy's just hollow. There's nothing back there. So if you want to attach a shower door system, you are going to need to follow the instructions and space out either a 2x4 or in my instance, a 2x6 and space it out at the correct spacing that gives you that screwing surface that you could attach your glass door system to. Now I'm just using a standard rod and shower curtain, so I won't need that and I'm not going to install it on this, but I just want to call it out to make sure if that's in your plans for your bathroom that you get that 2x4 or 2x6 correctly spaced. Now that one's a little trickier. You need the proper spacing away from the wall, but it needs to be also exactly spaced from your back wall surface because it needs to fit into that pocket I just showed you correctly. So just a call out, but now I'm gonna jump into dry fitting all the panels. All right, so I'll place this back panel. Making sure both the top and bottom are fully back on our studs. Not a bad fit. All right, so now I'm gonna drill the 5 pilot holes on the back. And for this, I use a countersink bit. That's because you'll see the 1.25" deck screws that I'm gonna be using to hold this in. And I like to have that little countersink to try to bring those screw heads flush with this flange. Then I'll just go ahead and set a screw in each quarter just to hold it in place as we get our other 2 panels set. So now we'll do the non-valve panel and mount that. Again, make sure that lower end is all the way back, and this edge here should be flush with your tub. So that's a good reference point to also go off of. I'm gonna put eventually 5 screws in the side, not right now, but for the permanent mounting. And then I'll have 1 up top, 2, but I can tell I do not have actually a stud to sink that last screw into in this corner. And I definitely want that. And I don't want 12 inches of this just hanging out here. So I'm gonna install a small stud here so that I'll have a solid stud to actually mount into. So now I feel better about that. We'll put this panel back in place. Then I'm also going to use my level on the outside here. So that is plumb. That is where I'd actually want it. Now I'll just drill my pilot holes. Before I do my other pilot holes, I'm actually going to sink 1 screw in here, just referencing that plumb mark. Then I'll drill my other pilot holes. Now you don't have to be exact on these 5 on the outside, so you'll just do your top, your bottom, 1 in the middle, and then 2 evenly spaced. Then for the dry fit, I will sink 1 more screw just to keep this panel on the wall. So last panel to dry fit, but this is probably the toughest part of the project, and that's because I needed to cut out my tub spout and my mixing valve hole in that panel before I can dry fit it. And this is kind of a one and done. You don't want to mess up here or you're going to be going back to the store and getting a whole new panel kit. So the surfaces that I'll measure to locate the tub spout and mixing valve, 1 is just the tub surface itself, and then 2 would be the outside edge of this panel. So what we use for that outside edge is I'm going to use my level, make sure I have a straight line, and then I'm just confirming. I could mark that with a pencil, but it's actually, my straight line is right to the edge of the stud. So that's what I'm going to be referencing, measuring from the outside edge inwards. That's what I'll be measuring. So for the tub spout, I am 16 5/8. So 16 5/8 in from the outside edge, and then from the actual tub surface itself, 4 3/8. Now for the mixing valve, as you would expect, it is 16 5/8 as well. So that's lining right up with our drain. And then off the surface, I'm looking at 11 1/4. So if you've done this many times, awesome, take your measurements and go with it. If you haven't, probably recommend getting a piece of cardboard or something for a template, using these measurements, cutting out your holes, and then dry fitting the piece of cardboard to confirm everything's in place, your measurements are correct, the hole locations are correct, prior to cutting into your acrylic panel. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So now with the holes cut on our template, I have a 1-inch hole saw for the tub spout and a 3 1/4 inch hole saw for the valve itself. It's very important that on your template you obviously have square factory edges if you're using like cardboard, because you're going to ride that on the tub just like the acrylic panel would, and then I'll line that outside up with my outside edge. So the only adjustment I'm going to make is I'm going to go up 1/4 inch on my valve. So other than that, we're good. So I'm going to be going to 11.5. So 16 5/8 will be the same, and 4 3/8 is good for the tub spout, and then 11.5 is what I'm going to do for the 3 1/4 inch hole saw for the valve. So let's go out and cut the acrylic panel. Again, you want to make sure your measurements are correct on this one because there's no going back once you cut those. Okay, so we have the panel laying down flat. I'm going to measure from the back side because I also want to drill from the back side. If I had any damage and scuff the surface, that will be on the back opposed to damaging the front, which would not be good. Also, instead of rotating the hole saw clockwise like normal, I'm going to hit it in reverse. Very easy to drill through the acrylic, and this way it will be less likely to grab on, and it'll just slowly cut through the acrylic. Now you don't want to go too slow or the acrylic actually starts to melt and kind of makes a mess. So this would be our bottom surface. So I'm going to go 4 3/8 up from this for my tub spout. And then I'll go 11.5 with that small adjustment for my valve. Then I'll go to the outside surface, and that will be 16 5/8. Do that for both of these. All right, and that's it. X marks the spot for these. We can cross-reference with our template, just held in reverse. So tub spout's looking solid. The valve is a bit high. Just gonna confirm those dimensions. 16 5/8 looks good. Going up. And this one, it's a bit high, so I'm just gonna make a small adjustment on there. Now is the time to adjust before you start cutting. All right, looks good. I'll just get the bit set by going clockwise. Once that breaks through, then I'll go in reverse. All right, there's our first hole. Now we'll do the 1-inch hole for the tub spout. Then I'll go in reverse. All right. So here's the real moment of truth. You're kind of questioning your measurements as you fit this up. All right, tub spout at least matches. And I really like to see that this bottom portion can push the back acrylic all the way against the wall. My tub spout is definitely not lined up, but it will work. And the important part about the valve is the 2 screws that will hold the trim piece will also line up. So I think that's great. Now, don't ask me how I know this, but if this hole, let's say you do a 1-inch and it's actually interfering with your tub spout roughen, well, and you want to get this back corner back, so you need to increase it to 1.125" or 1.25", and you have that hole saw. Well, sometimes it's hard to drill that out exactly centered up. So what you can do, just so happen to have an example, cut that new hole through a piece of wood, put it on the back side, and then that will serve as the guide to your hole saw to make sure it doesn't jump off center when you're drilling that new hole. So that works with this example or for other use cases as well. So now I'll drill all my pilot holes and temporary mount that, and then we'll check level on everything and see if we need to make any small adjustments. So I got everything dry fit, except for I have a little bit of an interference here on the shower elbow with this top flange. So I just need to trim it off a little bit so I can get everything mounted against the studs and do our final checks. All right, with that trimmed up, I'll just go ahead and set one more screw here. So now with everything in place, you can do your final checks with your bubble level, making sure your top surfaces are level, then also checking plumb on your side pieces, and then going through and looking at all your gaps. So these multi-piece surrounds can be a little bit tricky because you have these gaps that might be closed at one end and then open up to a 1/16, 1/8, or even a 1/4 of an inch on the other end. That's where you're going to run into some issues, and you're really going to want to close those gaps to get them as small as possible. So once we set the adhesive on the studs, we support these and press them against that adhesive and hold it to let it set up over time. And then we caulk all those seams that you have that firm end product that is watertight that you're looking for. So before we take these off, that's where you're really going to want to make any small adjustments, because now we're going to start applying the adhesive. So now with everything confirmed it'll fit, I'm going to remove all these panels. And don't forget, the kit does come with a protective pad here. This is to protect the acrylic surround from an open flame if you're soldering on your mixing valve. Now I'm using PEX, but even using PEX, let's future-proof our install. Install this, super easy to install. And then if somebody wants to do solder in the future and access that from the backside, at least they have a protective pad in place so the open flame will not melt your acrylic surround. Now we're at a part where we're going to start installing the adhesive and the sealant. Now, I did mark the top of my surround prior to taking it off. And then also I just put small like A's and S's around. So A means where I want to put adhesive. So that's just telling me, okay, on these stud surfaces, you want to put adhesive. That's going to bond between the stud and the surround. So when we support that, that adhesive will set up, and that's really going to give a lot of rigidity to this Delta tub surround, which is needed because without it, it's pretty flimsy. And then sealant. So sealant's usually going, let's say, between the tub surface and your back panel. So you're starting to get a watertight seal in these different surfaces, even during the install of the paneling. Although at the end, once everything's installed, we will go back and seal actually each of the seams from the outside, which will give us another layer of protection from water getting behind the panel. So you want to make sure everything is ready, the supports you're going to use. So watch this whole section before you start it on your own, because you will need to support it right after applying all this. And there is kind of a time constraint where you don't want the adhesive setting up while you're getting your supports cut or finding out what you're going to use for support. Now, specifically for adhesives and sealants adhesive, I'm going to use the Loctite adhesive for tubs and surround. Now for sealants, it can be a bit tricky. I'm using this hybrid amp from DAP. It does work with acrylic. That's the key, is because this is an acrylic tub surround, a lot of your different sealants actually do not bond very well to acrylic. So there are recommended sealants. DAP 3.0 I know is one recommended. Loctite has a product, EcoBond, and I think there is one more. Those are the recommended, but at least right now, for me, those are extremely hard to find. Lowe's doesn't have them, Home Depot doesn't have them, Menards doesn't have them, Ace doesn't have them. For whatever reason, there seems to be a bit of a shortage. So I'm going with this hybrid. It's a newer product from DAP. It should work for me, but if you can get the DAP 3.0 or the Loctite product, just get that ahead of time so you're ready to go. So I'm going to apply adhesive for the back panel and sealant for the back panel, get that in place, screw it in place, and then I'm going to do adhesive and sealant for both of the walls and put both of those panels in place. Those side walls and getting those really pressed against the back is really what holds that bottom corner of the back panel. So you really want to apply that pressure to get everything securely held, and then that outside rim on your side panels, that's where you're placing screws and it's applying that force to the back panel. But because we did our dry fit, we know everything's going to fit well. Also, probably not a bad plan to have some shims available just in case you need to shim a top flange out just a little bit to close a gap between panels. It's nice to just have those readily available if you need them. With all the panels set, now I want to support them. I'm going to use 4 telescoping support poles here. I use these to set up like plastic barriers if I'm doing a little drywall work and I want to try to contain the dust, setting cabinets, things like this. For about $30 a pole, you can pick up a set of 4 on our Amazon store in the general tools section. Now that'll have all the other tools that I recommend for DIYers, but specifically you'll see these exact poles that I'm using. Now if you need these poles right now and you can't wait the 2 days for Amazon, maybe check out Harbor Freight. Sometimes they'll have similar poles or the exact same poles that you can pick up for a project that day if you're close to Harbor Freight. So overall the setup's pretty easy. I'm gonna set 2 here, and I am gonna put small rags or cloth over the pads just to ensure that I don't damage the acrylic. But I telescope those out to get them roughly in the place that I want. Then I'll tighten up the telescoping, and then I'll use the small adjustment. It's important to set these up where the pads are pressing against a stud or very close to a stud. You don't want to set those up in the middle of a 16-inch wall cavity because that could deflect the overall acrylic surround. So I'll just place 4 of those, and then here's what the end product looks like, and then that will just sit holding the tub while the adhesive sets up. So earlier I mentioned 12 hours for keeping those supports in place. Best practice, go ahead and do 24 hours to make sure everything adheres between the stud and the acrylic surround. So by now, things should be quite a bit more firm, especially compared to when you just dry fit. And you also shouldn't hear as much creaking and cracking, right? Because we have the sealant now that we put between the panels. So that will really help to reduce the amount of noise you hear where the panels are creaking against each other. So for the last step, I'm gonna use that same DAP amp sealant. Remember, it's best to use the DAP 3.0, the Loctite equivalent, or the other two that are listed on the instructions. But those are all not available right now, so this is the one I'm going with, which should work fine even on the acrylic. My gaps do vary a little bit. I have very tight gaps on some panels and some that space out to about 3/16 of an inch. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut the tip on the DAP. I'm gonna lay that small bead in the gaps that are smaller, finish all those, just use my finger slightly wetted to smooth those all out, get out any excess, and then cut that tip a little bit larger, lay down the larger bead where I have the bigger gaps, and then smooth those out again with my finger. So that's the plan of attack, and I'm gonna jump into it now. So overall, I am feeling good about the Delta 400 series tub surround. It is pretty flimsy when you first get it, but if you follow all those steps, you let your support set up for 24 hours, you get your adhesive on your studs, you have support everywhere, kind of all those steps we went through, it ends up being a pretty solid surround, and especially for the money. Now, if you want to continue to follow along on this project, see the drywall go in, see my attempt to mudding and sanding the walls down smooth and starting to paint, putting in the floor, the vanity top, the mirror, a full DIY bathroom remodel for $1,500, one of the best ways to increase the value of your home with a little sweat equity. Check out this video right here, and it walks start to finish on this project. I think it'd be a great project for you guys, and I appreciate you joining me on this video, and we'll catch you on that next one. Take care.